Hey piano people! In today's tutorial, I'm going to give you 3 steps that you can take to make any arpeggio in any piece sound better. I'm going to be using real life examples so that you can take everything that you learned in this video and apply it to your practice today. If we haven't met before, I'm Ashley. Welcome to the channel. Let's dive in. The first step that you can take to make arpeggios sound better is to pick a good fingering and be consistent. Fingering can be a little bit challenging because there's always the question of what is the right fingering. And ultimately, there's going to be several options that will most likely work, and you need to pick what feels the best for you. But there are some things that you want to keep in mind when you're trying to pick a fingering. Ideally, this is the very first thing that you're doing when you're learning a piece, is choosing the fingering that's going to lay that solid foundation for consistency as you go on. What I don't want is for you to just sit down at the piano and make up your fingering as you go, because this leads to a lack of consistency that makes it really challenging to play with freedom and fluidity. Now, when you're going to pick fingering, you want to keep in mind what comes before and after the passage that you're looking at. And you also want to keep in mind what feels comfortable underneath the hand. What is the fingering that you can use that is going to minimize the movement of your individual fingers, but maximize the freedom and flexibility of the rest of your arm. So let's dive in and look at these 3 examples. The first example that we're going to look at is River Flows In You by Yuruma. And in measures 9 and 10 of this example, we have these arpeggios that are spread out broken chords. And so what we're going to do is repeat the same fingering pattern over and over and over again so that we're not reinventing the wheel. So we're going to use 5, 2, 1, 5, 2, 1, 5, 5, 2, 1, 5, 5, 2, 1. And we're going to talk about later in the video why I chose those fingers and how it makes sense for the proper technique. But you're repeating the same pattern in different geographic areas of the keyboard. And so it makes sense to keep doing the same fingering so that you're not reinventing the wheel, right? Your brain can commit that fingering to memory pretty easily. Now we're going to be looking at Chopin's Nocturne Opus 9, number 1. The left hand is actually really similar to the River Flows In You, but it has a little pivot point. So we come up with 5, 2, 1, but then we come back down. 3 and back up, 1, back down, 5. And so we have these little pivot points where we not just start at the bottom and go up like in the last piece, but we're going to go up, down, down, up, down. So the fingering we're going to use is 5, 2, 1, similar to what we did before, but then we're going to pivot on 5, pivot on 4, 3. Now, the pattern is very repetitive, and so we're going to take that basic pattern and those basic fingerings and apply them to the entire piece. The last piece that we're going to look at is Widmung by Liszt. That one. And we have this same repetitive broken pattern or broken chord or arpeggio in the left hand. Now, the fingering here, you're going to see a lot of different editions that have different ideas about what to do with the fingering. The fingering that I like to use is 5 and 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 2 and 5, 1, 2, 3. And I'll talk more about why later in the video, but basically whenever you're doing arpeggios, it can be really helpful to think of where you are on the keyboard and where you're resetting, kind of like what we talked about in the last example. And so with this one, I want to minimize my cross unders and overs because I'm not going very far, right? If I were starting all the way down here and I needed to go all the way up here, I would have to utilize a lot of crossovers. But because I'm kind of hovering around this position and this position and this position and this position, I want to minimize those crossovers and reset the hand position really only where needed. So that is the logic behind that fingering, and we'll talk a little bit more about it at future points in the video. The second step to making any arpeggio sound good is to utilize the motion of your arm, not your fingers. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make when they are trying to play arpeggios or any other kinds of passages where they're moving around the keyboard a lot. If you're learning from this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, Subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on any notifications, and share this video with another adult piano player or a group of piano players so that their arpeggios can sound better as well. Now, in every single example that we're going through in this video, we're going to utilize two motions. And these two motions are very, very, very important for proper piano technique. You don't only utilize them in arpeggios, you actually utilize them a lot on the piano, but they definitely apply to arpeggios. And so let's go over those two motions that you're going to use. The first motion that you're going to utilize is what I call the wrist hinge. And when you do the wrist hinge, you're going to essentially be moving your wrist from left to right. Now, this is not a motion that we want to do all the time or that we want to get stuck in, right? Because if I put my wrist at this angle and I stay there, that's going to create a lot of pain and tension. And same with this. But this left to right motion is really important when we are playing arpeggios. And I'm going to show you in each of the pieces how it comes up. So in the Chopin Nocturne, you can see that I start to the left, I hinge to the right so that my thumb can reach this D flat, hinge a little bit again so I can reach the F, and then I hinge back down to lead me back down to this lower note. Hinge, hinge, hinge. I'm going to show you up to tempo. That it's my wrist doing this motion that's actually guiding me to where I need to be on the keyboard. I do the same thing in River Flows in You. I'm always starting with my wrist down where I need to be, and then it's my wrist that's guiding me up to where my thumb needs to land. Now, if you're not using this wrist motion, what's going to happen is you're going to be placing individual fingers on individual keys. And as long as you're trying to lead with your fingers by having your fingers search for and find the note, it's going to take you a really long time to get there. And it's also not going to sound very free or very musical. So let's look at the list as well. So again, I'm starting down here, supporting where my pinky needs to be. Hinging up, so my thumb, you see that little crossover? So my thumb can reach the E flat. That's a fast motion. And again, if I'm waiting for my thumb to come up on its own and I'm putting all the motion in the thumb, it's gonna take a really long time and it's not gonna be very accurate. So I hinge left, I hinge right to reach the A flat, but then I hinge even further to reach the E. Hinge back down, up, up, down, up. Motion that I'm going to utilize is the elbow guide, okay? And this ties into what I was just explaining, that we don't want to let our fingers be the guides here because things are going to go really slow and not be very free or fluid. And so when you are moving around the keyboard, in addition to the wrist hinge, you can actually let your elbow be the guide. When I move my elbow from left to right, the rest of my hand follows, right? And it's a little bit of an awkward motion, but follow along with me. Go ahead and take your elbow, use your right hand to grab your left elbow and swing it back and forth, swing it out and in. And what happens naturally? The rest of my hand is going to follow. And so when I'm doing arpeggios, especially arpeggios where I need to move, from low down to up high on the keyboard, I can use the little wrist hinge to help me, but I can also use the elbow as a larger motion to guide that wrist where it needs to go. So let me show you what I mean. Let's take the Chopin Nocturne. In addition to my little wrist hinge that you just saw me do, I'm actually going to start with my elbow out, and I'm going to exaggerate a little bit in this video so that you can really tell what I'm doing. Out, and then watch my elbow. It comes in and it tucks right here next to my torso. And oftentimes people will think like, okay, well, how do I move my elbow when I'm doing arpeggios? And you can bring your elbow really close to your torso. And you can also, for moments in the music, kind of scoop out and lean back and bring your elbow in front of your torso. Okay? Now these are awkward motions. You're not going to do these all the time, but just for moments in time in your pieces when you need that freedom and flexibility. So watch my elbow as I play the Chopin Nocturne. Left-right motion. It's the elbow that's supporting the hinge. The same thing happens in River Flows in You. Watch my elbow. right. This is gonna feel pretty awkward when you first start doing it because it's going to feel unnatural, but the more you practice it very slowly, the easier it's going to get. Let's look at the last example, Widmung by Liszt. Now here I'm really gonna tuck my elbow in front of my torso so you can go ahead and watch as I play. Both hands are moving in the direction that I need to go for this motion. The third step that you can take to make any arpeggio in any piece sound better is to chunk the notes into chord blocks. A quick announcement, enrollment for Casual to Confident Piano Player is open right now as this video is being released. It's only going to be open until tonight at midnight Pacific time, and it only opens a couple of times a year. If you're ready to level up your piano playing so that you can express yourself deeply through the music, go ahead and check out the link in the description below where you can join. This is the last time it's going to be open this year. In the context of any piece that you are learning, but especially when it comes to arpeggios, if you are trying to remember every single individual note, it's going to be a losing battle. You're always going to be playing a lot slower than you want, and you're never really going to be able to have that freedom of expression. Because as long as you're thinking note by note by note, your brain is working overtime. Your brain is working so hard to try to line everything up and to try to micromanage every single note. You have to be able to get your brain to think of things as a unit. And once you start to think of things as a unit, you clear up space in your brain for other things. So what I want you to do is chunk out the chords into units. And I'm gonna put some examples up on the screen so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But you can see here in the Chopin that I have these little blue and purple squares. And these little squares are basically showing you where your different hand positions are, right? So the first hand position is down with the B flat, the F, and the D flat. And that's when I'm going from down low on the keyboard to up high. Now, I have an overlap with the purple square because that D flat is actually where I also do this little hinge motion, right? And I swing down to the B flat, up to the F, down to the F. And those are two little chunks of notes that I can group together. The first chunk is in the blue square, and it's the B flat, the F, and the D flat. Then I do this little turnaround, and I have this second chunk, B flat, F, F. So my hand is essentially down low on the piano and then up high on the piano. And it's those two little chunks in that first part of that measure that I can start to remember as opposed to individual notes. This is gonna help your muscle memory kick in a lot faster and also your cognitive memory so you really know what's going on in the piece. The cool thing is that that pattern is also just gonna repeat, and that's what you'll find a lot when you're looking at pieces that have arpeggios, is that once you find the little chunk where you can kind of group the notes together, those patterns are going to be very repetitive in the piece. So it's not like you have to look at every single measure and come up with something new. You'll often find the pattern within the first couple of measures, and then it's gonna repeat in the entire piece. In River Flows In You, it's really easy because the left-hand patterns are not overlapping. You have one pattern, and then another pattern, and then another pattern. All of those patterns use the same fingering, and you're just moving to different geographical areas of the keyboard. So my first pattern is F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and then I move my hand. I do a very similar fingering with different notes. D, A, E, D, right? And then I'm gonna carry on like that throughout the entire piece. Now, Widmung is gonna be very similar to the Chopin, where we have a little bit of overlap, but we basically have this first part in the purple box, where I start to transition by crossing over, but my hand is essentially down here lower on the piano. Once I do that crossover, I'm in one hand position, one stretched out chord or one stretched out block for that second part. Now, the Widmung kind of alternates between those two hand positions, basically for the entire piece. Now, once you chunk out the notes and you've found the patterns and you can think of not individual notes, but groupings of notes and where you are geographically on the piano, then you're going to utilize a revolutionary practice method to drill these arpeggios so that they are fluid and free and smooth and sparkly. Now, I have an entire tutorial where I dive into 3 revolutionary practice methods that would be perfect for any arpeggio in any piece. So as a next step, I would suggest that you check out that tutorial and implement one of those practice techniques to make your arpeggios sound even better. You can watch that tutorial right here.